assistance. In terms of campus-provided support, that's something we've actually see stay the same or trend down. And probably the reason for that, and it goes back about 8 or 10 years, where typically students were arriving on campus with more knowledge than the folks they were turning to at the campus level for support. They just had a more refined set of computing skills. I see one nodding head, so thank you for believing what I'm saying. Acquiring software. We heard so much in the last couple of years with the RIAA in terms of the incidence of music piracy on college campuses. Well, you know, the dirty little secret that a lot of folks like Adobe know and Microsoft know is that there's been a serious issue of software piracy on college campuses. Is it to the same degree as music piracy? No, because clearly software doesn't have the same type of cachet that music does. But still, it's a serious problem. In fact, we see, to say it in a kind of a polite way, 1 in 5 students, 22%, said they borrowed it from their friend or family. And I'm sure they didn't register that borrowed software with anyone. But it still continues to be a significant challenge to both, not just software publishers, but software retailers as well. Internet use, and I'm sure, again, this would surprise you. We only have 5% of students, it's that little orange slice of the pie there, that say they go online less often than once a day. Top online activities, and it kind of correlates with what's on campus, but you can see how important these activities correlate or integrate with their lives as students. Check grades, check out someone else's online profile, complete a class assignment, send or receive email, check the weather. To check the weather has always been a huge surprise to us. We're not sure that isn't code for something else. What sites have they visited this semester? And again, this may not surprise you, but at least you've got hard numbers to support your intuition. The top 3 sites, and this says sites visited this semester, and I need to put that in context for you because the real question said, the real question said, well, which of these sites have you visited this semester? We were on campus administering this study a month into the school year. So these are actually sites that you visited in the past 30 days, in the past month. That's not in the past semester. Google, Facebook, YouTube, ABC.com, up there dramatically from what it was before. What I wanted you to look at here was MySpace at 29%. We've seen that again from a trend standpoint, trend down from a high in the 60s to the 50s to the 40s, and now it's in the very high 30s. Time spent with social networks. Ginny made a point of this in her comments in the beginning, and if you can imagine this, 92%, and that's that bar chart on the left side, 92% of all students said they'd gone on Facebook in the past week. That's a huge, huge number. More importantly, look over to the right-hand side of that, where they tell us they're spending an average of 160 minutes with Facebook. That's a user mean. In other words, it's among the 92% of students who say, I visited Facebook in the past week, as opposed to a total mean. But 160 minutes is an enormous amount of time invested, if you will. And again, that same correlation that you saw with MySpace in the previous slides. Twitter has come as a bit of a surprise to us. It doesn't seem to have gained the number of student users that we would have expected. Online courses, and again, to follow up on a comment that Ginny made, almost 7 in 10 students, and that's up from 61% last year, a steady year-over-year increase, report that one or more of their courses had an online component to it. What we see is, at a little slower rate, is the number of students who say they've taken a completely online course rather than a course that has an online component, either from their school or from another institution. And I'm sure this probably doesn't come as a huge surprise to you. When we ask students, what's the motivation for taking these online courses? And again, it's at convenience, and to a lesser degree, the fact that it was only offered online. You know, we can look at so much of our work, and when we try to understand why students are doing what they're doing, the action word or the trigger word or the key motivator there is convenience, convenience, convenience. It's a huge driver. Textbook spending. I wanted to talk a little bit about both traditional textbooks and e-books. as well as renting textbooks, which came out again this semester. This pie really represents the total dollars that the average student spent for textbooks this past semester, and it was $326. If you wanted to get, not sloppy, but convenient and say, well, what do students spend for textbooks in a typical year, you could simply double that number. So this is based on the fall semester. But you can see the largest share of their spending for textbooks was for new printed textbooks, 56%. 2% of the student spending for textbooks went for rented textbooks, and an equal number, or approximately equal number, went for e-textbooks, purchasing e-textbooks. And again, these are based on total means, they're not user means. Digital textbooks, we've seen a steady increase in the number of students who say, I'm aware of e-textbooks and I've purchased an e-textbook, but it's still at what we call kind of moderate levels. In this case, you can see this fall, only 9% of students say that they purchased an e-textbook this semester. And again, if we try to understand the dynamics about that, you would think that it's all about cost. Well, it really isn't. We see 23% of students said, I purchased an e-textbook because it's less expensive than a traditional printed textbook. But you know what? So is a used textbook less expensive than a new textbook. Does anybody have an idea of why students are so attracted to used printed textbooks? I beg your pardon? This gentleman said they're cheaper. What else? Pardon me? Absolutely right. They've already been highlighted. So to those of you who have an interest in the e-digital segment of the textbook business, come out with a textbook that's already been highlighted, and you'd be surprised, I think, the number of students that will at least try it. Thank you for that participation. And again, we only have 46% of students, less than half, said they didn't buy an e-textbook because they prefer traditional printed textbooks. And again, I think if we go back and made that modification, they would say, this alludes to what I just talked about in this bar chart. If they could only have one format, what would they prefer? Well, half said I'd prefer a used printed textbook. About 1 in 5, 21% said I want a combination of new and used printed textbooks. About 1 in 7 new printed textbooks. But renting all of my textbooks or e-textbooks to solve all of my issues, it appeals to a relatively small minority of students. We'll talk a little bit about wireless reading devices, and I think we're running out of time here, so let me try to condense this for you. There is not the interest. Would you raise your hand? Please raise your hand. This is my wife, my lovely wife, Sandra Butler Weil. I bought her a Kindle. She's an avid reader, and I bought her a Kindle about a year or so ago. And she loves it, she uses it, and all of her friends use it, and so on and so forth. We are trying to understand why wireless reading devices aren't catching on with college students. I mean, they understand the technology, there's a cost savings there if you think about the cost of an e-book versus someone. Does anyone have any idea why they haven't caught on? Robert? That's certainly part of it, and I think that'll probably be addressed from a software standpoint. There is the issue of portability and so on and so forth. But in terms of digital devices, and I used this word earlier, Sandy uses her Kindle because she loves to read. Okay, we have yet, in over 20 years, to run into large numbers of students who love to read their textbooks. Again, it doesn't have the cachet that, let's say, an iPod has or another entertainment-related device. So what do we see in terms of how this is happening? It's kind of like the old Apple model from 20-some-odd years ago, where it starts at the elementary level, and students just get ingrained or indoctrinated or comfortable with an e-textbook because they don't know anything other than an e-textbook, and they carry that through. But is this the type of thing that is going to be adopted by huge numbers of students very quickly? Probably not.